Friends, chess players, welcome back. Today we have a juicy episode, an episode about strategy. We're going to talk about what I consider the most important strategy, the most important thing to know in the middle game to play well, the theory of exchanging pieces. I've already talked about this theory, but today we'll see it in practice. I'll repeat it for you, and we'll look at some fitting examples. In my opinion, this theory is the most important of all in the middle game. Because having the answer, the question of who benefits from exchanging pieces in a given position, is the question. And it's the most important answer we can have in a chess middle game. Because if I know that in a given position it's in my interest to exchange a piece, then I will play in a certain way. By understanding clearly that it's in my opponent's interest to trade off a specific piece on the board, then in some way I can proactively anticipate and identify their most troublesome strategies. The ones I need to carefully foresee and effectively prevent. So truly understanding this theory gives us access to a whole lot of strategic depth because, I repeat, fully grasping this concept is what directly guides our middle game analysis. The theory is actually very simple because it needs to be contextualized with the concept of dynamism in chess. Dynamism is based on three main factors. The first is activity, the second is king safety, and the third is the space advantage. Obviously, each of these three elements has many variations, but we'll simplify them like this. King safety, piece activity, the activity of the pieces. Again, it could be your most active piece or your opponent's least active piece. In any case, it's about activity. And then the space advantage. After we've examined these three elements, what should we do? We need to make a sort of assessment to understand who has a dynamic advantage and who doesn't. Let's put this into context with the theory of piece exchanges. Definition: the player with less dynamism should exchange pieces. Very well, now let's see this in practice so we can put it into context. Let's look at a fairly common opening, a fairly common structure. We're entering from the Karo. Campanov, however, usually the same position can also be reached through a Nimzo Indian move order. So they seem like different openings but end up in the same place. Here it is, the famous isolated pawn position. Let's just castle both kings to put it into context. So in this position, let's try to examine these three elements of dynamism. Okay, the simplest one for now is the king, right? The kings, both of them more or less, don't have any problems at the moment, so the kings, they're equal. Space, what can we say? It's definitely in white's favor. Piece activity, this is also pretty easy to analyze, right? You see, white's pieces are well developed. White has open lines for his pieces. Black, on the other hand, has less space, which means his pieces are a bit more cramped. This bishop is blocked by this pawn, so it will have to lose a bit more time to maybe develop optimally. And the same goes for the knight. You see, it's still not developed, so it's quite clear that in this position, the initiative is with white. This, by the way, is the classic position where black sacrifices this initiative because black has less dynamism. However, white has the weakness of the isolated pawn, so let's say white's advantage in initiative is compensated by the weakness of the isolated pawn. Well, at this point then it's quite clear. Let's state the definition. Basically, in this position, white should not exchange pieces while black should. This is also easy to understand. Here, white needs to generate offensive moves to create an attack in positions like this. White must try to play very energetic moves. Let's go a bit further with the moves just to... It's not the strongest move, obviously, knight to d7, but I want to help you understand a concept. Here, white needs to produce offensive moves because their advantage is a dynamic one. So here I would never dream of playing, for example, I don't know, h3 with the idea, yes, I'm preventing knight to g4 and giving my king an escape square. Who knows, maybe one day. No. Here, white needs to come up with dynamic ideas, attacking ideas. A typical attacking idea, for example, with the isolated pawn, could be the rook lift, right? Where the rook is placed on these two squares to obviously generate an attack against the opponent's king. Other very well-known ideas with the isolated pawn. Let's remove these arrows. Another very famous idea is the breakthrough push with d5. So one idea could be to line up all the pieces to control d5 and then launch this pawn. Other ideas, of course, involve pushing the pawn. F in this way opens up this diagonal to make use of the bishop's power and, of course, also the rooks on the f7 square. You see, these are all fairly energetic ideas. In this position, white should not exchange pieces. For example, a mistake could be bishop to g5. Bishop to g5 is definitely a move that you've seen in many positions, right? It's a fairly common move, the bishop. Usually it goes to g5. In this position, bishop to g5 doesn't make sense. It doesn't make any sense at all, because we're actually helping black, ideally, to exchange pieces. I mean, here, all I have to do is move the knight to threaten the exchange of pieces. For example, here, a strategy could be to play this move to control the blockade square on d5. And then afterwards, in this case, at this point, I bring the other knight to d5, and I threaten the exchange of both this minor piece and also this other minor piece. So you see, a seemingly harmless move like bishop to g5 actually turns out to be an inaccurate move from this point of view, because it helps black solve his problem, which is the exchange of pieces. So you see how this theory of exchanging pieces, it helps us a lot in many middle game positions, because it makes us understand what we need to do. It's the same thing here for black, for example, right? So black, thanks to this theory, understands that the move bishop to g5 is not a threat. In fact, bishop to g5 is actually welcome. And so here black should never make a move like h6 to prevent bishop to g5, because as we said, bishop to g5 is welcome. So I shouldn't waste a tempo to prevent a move that I would actually be quite happy to see. Let's look at another position that I personally consider very important, which is this one here. This position is from the classical Sicilian, the main line. We're not interested in playing a Sicilian tutorial, but this position helps us understand something very important. In the meantime, if you want to analyze it from a dynamic point of view, pause the video and then listen to my analysis. Here, of course, I'll analyze it for you. Me. Let's see how things stand from a dynamic perspective. Space? Well, I'd say it speaks for itself. White's advantage. King? Well, I'd say black's king is a bit more exposed than white's king, who's nice and safe. Piece activity. Okay, to be fair, black does have a few developed pieces, but still white has this open file, is very active, and both knights are well developed. And then very quickly, he'll also bring this rook into play, right? So for sure, this is a position where white has a dynamic advantage, and I'd say, since he's also given up the bishop pair, he must have some compensation for it, right? Here, for example, a move we would like to make, given this dynamic advantage, is the move f5, right? Because we have the dynamic advantage, and so we want to open up the position. What happens, but here, that obviously black can do this, that is, he can exchange all these pieces. Well, what have we said so far? That black, having less dynamism, is quite happy to exchange pieces, right? And so, as white, we must not allow this, especially letting him exchange such a powerful piece as the queen. So here we can't play f5, we need to think of something else. And why am I showing you this position here? Because I also want you to reflect on the concept of being extremists in chess. It's one thing to know the theory. So theory says that if I have a dynamic advantage, I shouldn't exchange pieces. So I don't exchange them. But then I shouldn't be an extremist, because in this position, if I move my pieces back just to avoid exchanging them, I'm going to get hit with a big b4 move. As big as a house. Which obviously puts me in trouble because my knight doesn't have many squares left. Even if I had played knight to f3, still b4, which is annoying, I have to move the knight back, and as you can see, my pieces start to get a bit blocked. So I'm showing you this position to help you understand. Okay, there's theory, but then we need to be flexible. In fact, here the move that needs to be played is, the theoretical move for white is knight takes c6. So unfortunately, you have to exchange one piece, but that's okay, you only exchange one. But you do not exchange queens, so that's why knight takes c6 is the right move, because at least I do not exchange queens. This theory, the theory of dynamism, is the only theory we apply to understand whether we should exchange a piece or not. Many people say, oh yes, if you have more pieces, exchange pieces so you can win the endgame. Nothing could be more wrong than that. Because these are two different types of advantages. One is a dynamic advantage, and the other is a material advantage. If I have a material advantage, why should I sacrifice my dynamic advantage? Dynamic, it's an extra advantage I have, so if I have an extra pawn and I'm also more active, I'm attacking my opponent, but I keep attacking even if there's a chance to exchange pieces. I don't do it because I'm more dynamic, and every exchange of pieces, even with extra material, will help my opponent. So it doesn't make sense for me to give away my advantage. Dynamic. So, when you have to decide whether it's better to exchange a piece or not, always look at the dynamism of the position. Activity, king, space. Then, I repeat, Try not to be extremists, even if you have more dynamism. If you realize that in a certain position it's actually better for you, you have to exchange pieces. Because if you fall behind, that's not a good thing, right? At that point, let's not be extremists and go ahead and exchange anyway. Alright guys, I hope that with this lesson it's now quite clear how to exchange pieces in a chess middle game, which in my opinion is extremely important. So, in every position I repeat, answering this question gives you an idea of how you are playing, how you should play, and how your opponent will have to play. So I thank you for following this lesson. And as always, if you want to support this channel, I invite you to subscribe, like, comment, hype, whatever you want. And I'll see you in the next videos.